Mic check. 1, 2. Are we recording? Hi, I'm Michelle Bernstein, an award-winning chef, restaurateur, and mom. I have a lot on my plate, including my psoriatic arthritis symptoms. That's why I was prescribed Cosentyx. It helps me move better.
Cosentyx secukinumab is prescribed for people 2 years of age and older with active psoriatic arthritis. Don't use if you're allergic to Cosentyx. Before starting, get checked for tuberculosis. An increased risk of infections and lowered ability to fight them may occur, like tuberculosis or other serious bacterial, fungal, or viral infections. Some were fatal. Tell your doctor if you have an infection or symptoms like fevers, sweats, chills, muscle aches, or cough, had a vaccine or plan to, or if inflammatory bowel disease symptoms develop or worsen. Serious allergic reactions and severe eczema-like skin reactions may occur. Learn more at 1-844-COSENTYX or Cosentyx.com.
Ask your rheumatologist about Cosentyx.
It's The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
Singing about the brain of JFK. We have spent a lot of time analyzing the Kennedy assassination on this program. Is there any theory left? Is there any stone unturned? People have been debating this, discussing this for 60 years, more. And I don't know that we're any closer to solving the mystery of the Kennedy assassination now than we were when the Warren Commission came out with his report. But we are also about 5 days away from a new president coming into office. That president has indicated he will be making public reams of documents related to the John F. Kennedy assassination. This is particularly noteworthy because someone that has been, pushing for that has been Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the nephew of John F. Kennedy, and someone that is now going to be in the Trump administration. I was fascinated by this new book, The Oswald Puzzle, Reconsidering Lee Harvey Oswald, because it deals squarely with one of the things that Oswald claimed when he was arrested. You remember? Remember on television, for all to hear, he said,
I don't know what this is all about.
Kill the president?
No, sir, I didn't. People keep asking me that. Sir?
You shoot the president?
I work in that building.
Were you in the building at the time?
Naturally, if I work in that building, yes, sir.
Back up, man. Did you shoot the president?
No, they're taking me in because of the fact that I lived in the Soviet Union. I'm just a patsy.
President?
He said, I'm just a patsy. Is that true? Someone who may have an answer for that is Larry Hancock. He is an Air Force veteran, a historical researcher, and the co-author of the new book, The Oswald Puzzle, Reconsidering Lee Harvey Oswald. Larry, thanks for joining me on the radio.
Oh, it's great. Good morning, Frank.
Morning, Larry. Larry, what prompted your interest in this? And were you left wondering if there was any other new books to be written about the Kennedy assassination?
That's a great question, especially since I've been following the story for about 30 years and had already written 3 books about the assassination before this one. And that was kind of like, okay, I'm done.
Mm-hmm.
But then I stepped back and said, look, I wrote about the cover-up. I wrote about the conspiracy. We think we got the conspiracy lined out, did a book called Tipping Point on that. But it dawned on me that I'd left Oswald out of the puzzle because, like the Warren Commission, a lot of us conspiracy folks tend to look at Oswald as just a piece of, the puzzle, like not look at him as an individual, his full history, what he really meant by that I'm a patsy thing. Was he really totally clueless by what was coming down? So I decided I'd press the reset button and just focus on Lee Harvey Oswald and spend a couple of years trying to put Oswald back together again after, chopping it apart over the years for the other books.
So in your book, you challenge the Warren Commission's portrayal of Oswald as a lone assassin. What, in your view, is the most compelling evidence that suggests Oswald was, in fact, a patsy, possibly set up by the CIA?
One of the strongest things about it comes right out of the Warren Commission work itself, and the fact that they could not find a motive for Oswald. Oswald had said he didn't do it. He specifically said he had not shot the president. He said he was a patsy, but they spent a year and could not come up with a motive because everyone they talked to, and even Oswald's own writings, and he was writing extensively in '63, he agreed with Kennedy's policy. He was for racial integration. He was for economic justice. He was very much, people said that he thought Kennedy was the right kind of president to do the things that were needed. So right off the bat, you see that the Warren Commission had a real major problem because they could not find a motive.
You've uncovered Oswald's ties to anti-Castro activists in New Orleans. Can you explain how these connections might have been orchestrated to paint him as the perfect scapegoat?
Yeah, and we know part of that for absolutely sure, because when Oswald was in New Orleans, he began by the time he got there, he was already corresponding with the Fair Play for Cuba committee and was pro-Cuba. There's no doubt about that. He made that clear. But he had made contact with a series of anti-Castro Cubans. And as it turns out, the first person that he made contact with had a brother, and his brother happened to be a senior CIA political action and psychological operations officer at the JM Wave station in Miami. So as soon as Oswald is in New Orleans, he's immediately connected to Miami station. Actually, even after he does street leafleting and he goes into court charged with, creation of a public nuisance, three of the people in the court with him during his hearing are either CIA sources or actually operational for the CIA. So from the very beginning in New Orleans, he has all these connections, and we now know from the documents that have been released that this anti-Castro group, it's called the DRE, was already engaged in a propaganda campaign, writing congresspersons and writing articles about, this poor American who had been, entrapped by the Castro propaganda. And this was already underway. These people are actually paid by the CIA to do this. This was underway in August, months before the assassination.
You mentioned a CIA-funded Cuban student directorate creating propaganda about Oswald as early as August of 1963. How do you believe this propaganda campaign ties into what happened on November 22nd?
We think, we're pretty sure that propaganda campaign was intended to portray Oswald as a Cuban activist who had been subverted by Cuba, and it was so far along that even at the time of the assassination, a group called Inca in New Orleans, who was a propaganda arm of the CIA who had worked with him before, had a record ready to distribute talking about how dangerous Oswald was. I mean, this thing was quite far along, and they really had an operation ready to use him. What it looks like is that they were preparing this propaganda program, and several of the CIA officers and the anti-Castro Cubans that were working with that essentially decided, at this point in time in November, Oswald's in Dallas. He's in the school book depository. What better way to point the assassination towards Castro than to frame someone who's already set up? I mean, basically, the story's already in place. You don't have to do anything new. And he's been on radio and TV in New Orleans talking about being a Castro supporter. I mean, essentially, he's made himself into the ideal patsy to point towards Cuba.
So, in your version of events, not just this book, but your previous work as well, who do you, by the way, at 30 minutes after the hour, this is The Other Side of Midnight. In your work, who do you believe shot John F. Kennedy?
A team, basically, not an individual. Somewhere between at least 2 shooters, 3 shooters. These were a team of, again, specially trained anti-Castro Cubans who had actually been in training and in missions for some 3 years to kill Fidel Castro, actually with sniper attacks. They'd been into Cuba. They'd had missions aborted. These guys are highly trained in infiltration, exfiltration, sniper attacks, and they're working under the same CIA officers that they had been working with. And essentially, a team that was trained to kill Castro was turned against JFK. And interestingly enough, in 1967, when Garrison started his investigation, one of the people associated with that team actually took that story to Washington, D.C. as kind of like a diversion from Garrison. But his version of the story goes, well, this is the team that was trained to kill Castro, but for some reason Castro managed to get them to go after Kennedy, which is a ridiculous idea. But yeah, it's a team of well-trained paramilitary personnel.
You mentioned a couple of minutes ago that the Warren Commission essentially admitted that they couldn't identify a clear motive for Oswald's actions. How does that admission undermine the lone gunman theory?
Oh, it absolutely. Well, that's not. It undermines the lone gunman theory because it immediately opens the door that if it's not Oswald, if Oswald's not a good fit as a shooter, then what is a good fit? He doesn't have the motive. Who would have the motive? And immediately that leads us to the people who had the motive, and it's a motive that I trace out, and we trace out in a book called Tipping Point, which lays it sorely at the feet of senior CIA officers who were aware of the fact that Kennedy was about to initiate a dialogue with Fidel Castro. And actually, he had a representative going to meet with Castro in Cuba on November 22nd, and Kennedy's whole approach was to respond to Fidel Castro, who had asked him to do this. Castro's offering an accommodation, kick the Russians out, take Cuba neutral, restore diplomatic relations. And of course, as soon as this word was passed down to Washington, these people in Miami who've been trying to kill Castro for 3 years and basically will go, we've either got to do something about Kennedy or you guys are never going home because Castro's in power forever. That was the tipping point.
And people could absolutely check out that book, The Tipping Point, if they want to learn more about that specific aspect of this. By the way, have you always questioned the official narrative of the Warren Commission, or is this something that you came to later after doing a lot of research?
Two answers to that. Having lived through the assassination, I was a sophomore in high school that year. Having watched Ruby shooting Oswald on television, I remember sitting there and my father looking at it after the shooting going, well, now we're never going to know. So I think that question, the fact that, Ruby would come out of nowhere, this guy that appears to be unconnected to anything, and get in and shoot Oswald, established this question mark. But it wasn't until I got out of my career and retired and started looking at it again seriously that's like, could you ever deal this? Are there real names? Are there real documents? That was kind of the light bulb went on to me that went, there might be real people. We know something happened that was wrong, but could you ever tie this to a real group of people and a real motive. And then for the next 25 years, that happened.
If you're just tuning in, this is The Other Side of Midnight. I'm Frank Morano. My guest is Larry Hancock. His new book is The Oswald Puzzle, Reconsidering Lee Harvey Oswald. Larry, you've pointed out inconsistencies and omissions in the Warren Commission report, including advice not to scrutinize Oswald's shooting capabilities. How might this have changed public perception of the report if it had been included?
Oh, if one of the things we do know is that was just part of what emerged immediately following the assassination. I mean, immediately following the assassination, we've now seen the documents that basically Hoover told his FBI bureau Sunday after the assassination that they had to immediately write a report proving that Oswald and Oswald alone did it. And that report was written and leaked to the press within 2 weeks. And that was just the start of basically conditioning the media to portray him as a violent antisocial lone nut. If the other side of the coin had been presented to the public, being the fact that Oswald was not a particularly good shot. Oswald admitted to not being a particularly good shot. He barely qualified in his last shooting round in the Marines. He had no real pattern of having practiced. Actually, the Justice Department advisor to the Warren Commission staff gave them an opinion that they shouldn't even go into his shooting capabilities because they didn't have a story that would stand up. And I think that's an important part of it. Now we've seen all the internal documents from the Warren Commission where they realized themselves that they had a marginal case at best of standing up in court.
Do you see any evidence suggesting that the CIA's motive wasn't just to frame Oswald, but to shift blame towards Cuba or Russia in order to justify broader foreign policy actions?
Oh, absolutely. I think when you go back up the food chain from this, assault team that I've been talking about, and you get back into Washington, you find people at the top of the CIA that were very dissatisfied with Kennedy's policies. They didn't like Kennedy thought that he could make neutrality work. He was making it work in Laos. He looked to make it work in Vietnam, at least make that work. And these were hardline anti-communist, and they really felt we've seen, again, we can even see documents now that say that they felt that his policies were dangerous and something needed to be done about them. So, yeah, at the beginning, even among, we have some statements from people that were at least peripherally associated with the attack team and the attack in Dallas, and even they, after the fact, realized that to some extent they've been set up because there was a higher level agenda in play with the people that had kind of manipulated them and enabled them. They were just acting to kill Kennedy to prevent the Castro accommodation, but they realized that there were bigger strategic issues in play after the fact when the things that they had been promised, such as an invasion of Cuba, didn't happen.
How do you address skeptics who argue that the idea of a CIA conspiracy is just way too complex and involves too many moving parts to succeed without exposure?
Well, two answers to that. I think as far as the operational aspect, it's not a big conspiracy. You really need, a half a dozen people with this assault team, the paramilitary team, again, the same size team that had been trained to go into Cuba. You need some field support on the ground. Jack Ruby was brought into that for field support by John Roselli, who had been working in this Castro assassination project for, again, 3 years at that point in time. You don't have to have a lot of people from an operational standpoint. You just have to have the right people, and you have to have people that trust each other. So not a huge amount of people required, or is it ever? And I spent a good deal of time studying CIA assassination projects, and it always works the same way. A few case officers who are in the project that know what's required simply use their surrogates, who are never actually Americans, never CIA employees. They're revolutionaries. They use surrogates to actually do the operation, so it's deniable. So it absolutely fits the pattern of CIA practices. And the other thing is there were a few people who, over the years after the fact, did talk. I wrote a book called Someone Who Talked based on that premise. The thing is, they didn't go to the press. They talked to their lawyer. They talked to their families. Even the House Select Committee in the 70s took testimony from a couple of people who heard from this kind of folks just before their death. So, yeah, stuff does leak out over time, but it doesn't have to be a huge conspiracy.
This podcast is supported by Progressive, a leader in RV insurance. RVs are for sharing adventures with family, friends, and even your pets. So if you bring your cats and dogs along for the ride, you'll want Progressive RV insurance. They protect your cats and dogs like family by offering up to $1,000 in optional coverage for vet bills in case of an RV accident, making it a great companion for the responsible pet owner who loves to travel. See Progressive's other benefits and more when you quote RV insurance at Progressive.com today. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Pet injuries and additional coverage and subject to policy terms.
Plan on flying? In order to board domestic flights, your driver's license or state-issued ID must be a real ID. Learn how to get your real ID today at tsa.gov/real-ID or visit your local DMV.
How do, I alluded to a lot of these documents that have not been declassified yet, but there have been some documents that were declassified. How do newly declassified documents either challenge or confirm this theory, the notion of Oswald as a pawn in a larger chess game?
Well, I think one set of documents stands out in that regard, and that is the fact that we now know, although the senior CIA officers lied about this at the time, in statements, sworn statements, that the CIA itself was so concerned that some of its own people, some of its own officers, and especially the Cubans that they were working with had been involved, that they conducted an internal investigation after the assassination. We have the documents that of people that were questioned about that and acknowledged that it occurred, that they'd been given direction to do it. We even have a document showing what questions they were supposed to ask. And so we know that the CIA was seriously enough concerned to investigate itself. What we don't have, we have those documents, but what we don't have is what they found. That apparently disappeared, which is pretty suggestive in itself. You have an investigation and then the result of the investigation disappears. But I think the other thing pointing directly towards Oswald is the fact that Jeff Morley and others within this community have been in court for years now trying to get the documents that would reveal the CIA's contacts with the student group, the DRE, and their knowledge of Lee Harvey Oswald and their use of him. And it's been a decade now, and after being in front of judges multiple times, the CIA walks into close quarters and shows the judge something, and the judge comes out and continues the withholding of those documents. Clearly, there was something that was found that was destroyed, and there was something that's still being withheld that would connect the CIA to Lee Harvey Oswald.
Some critics might say you're cherry-picking evidence to fit a predetermined conclusion. How do you respond to that criticism?
Well, I think that's interesting because I always think the best way to know that you're going the right direction is when you find stuff that you weren't looking for. And when I started out on this trail, I looked at several of the most common leads. It seemed logical, was Lyndon Johnson associated with it? That had been bandied around forever. What about the mob? What about this? And the best answer I can give them is I spent some 20 years chasing what seemed to be the most prominent leads, and they didn't go anywhere. Or let's put it this way. They didn't go anywhere comparable at all to these new leads that emerged when we knew more. the scenario that I just painted for you, we could not even have thought of painting that scenario before, say, 10 years ago, because we had not seen the documents naming names, naming people, showing connections for the kind of conspiracy I just described. We had not seen those. We couldn't identify people. Huge amount of work had to be done with those documents, even to know, the real names behind the cryptonyms. So I guess that part of the answer is we didn't go the usual route to prove in what everybody kind of suspected. We had to go off on a brand new trail that emerged during the research.
If you could ask the CIA or the Warren Commission staff one question today, knowing everything that we now know, what would it be? What would you ask them?
The question would be, did you have an Oswald operation in progress in the fall of 1963? Were you using Lee Harvey Oswald from an operational standpoint, and did he know it? And that would be the most important part of the question, because what it looks like from this distance is that they did indeed have an operation in play, but Oswald was totally unwitting. He was being manipulated for deniability. So it would be a two-part question. Are you doing what it looks like you were doing? And by the way, did he know about it, or was he truly as unknowing as the tape that you played at the beginning sounds like? Everything from that day in Dallas, including the fact that Oswald didn't appear to be concerned really at all about legal exposure. He's talking to his wife about getting new shoes for the baby.
Right.
Yeah. He just really didn't understand what kind of danger he was in.
What do you hope readers take away from this book? And again, the book is called The Oswald Puzzle, if folks want to check it out, particularly those who still believe the official narrative of one lone gunman.
Well, I think there are three things. The first part of the book addresses issues of trust. Why would we trust the official story? Why would we trust the Warren Commission? Why would we trust the media? And I think we've got enough information in there now to make almost anyone aware that there are trust issues with the official story and the official history. The second thing would be about Oswald himself and the fact that Oswald was not at all the individual that was portrayed by the Warren Commission or in the history books. Actually, he was very intelligent, tested a 118 on an IQ test, wrote extensively. One of his Marine officers who had a degree in political science said that Oswald could talk geopolitics at his level and actually sometimes out-talk him in debates, which was embarrassing for Lee Harvey Oswald was not the person the history book makes him out to be. And I think that would rectify an injustice. And the third thing would be to really consider what Oswald was doing that week, that day, and really consider how separated he was from the events and how that literally he had to be connected to events by no more than a rifle that was introduced into evidence to link him to it. There was nothing more, and essentially everything else had to occur after the fact. He wasn't participating. He expected something very much different that day. Actually, he expected to end up in Cuba himself, which is where he had been trying to go for some 5-6 months by that time. So, long-winded answer, but I'd like all those three things to come out of it.
Given the resurgence of interest in the John F. Kennedy assassination, thanks in part to figures like RFK Jr., do you think we're any closer to understanding the full truth, or is this going to be an issue that people are talking about as an unsolved mystery on talk shows 30, 40, 50 years from now?
Here's the answer to that is, I think we are at the point where most everyone with a bit of reading and a little research can reach their own conclusion. Will we officially, with the government, will the history books reach that conclusion, or will it remain, as you just described it, kind of like the mystery of the century? I'm afraid it will. because I have yet to see even historians step back and say, we need to revisit this. We need to portray Oswald as more than just a stick figure and a lone gunman conspiracy. Until that happens, until you have some official verdict, which there never was, since there never was a trial, I don't think there will be officially a resolution. It's like everyone has to do it for themselves.
I alluded to the MK Ultra program. There's been a lot of speculation for years that Sirhan might have been essentially brainwashed by the CIA to take out, Robert F. Kennedy, John F. Kennedy's brother. Where do you think MK Ultra may play in with respect to Oswald?
The interesting thing is I don't see it. The reason I see it playing into what happened in Dallas, strangely enough, with a connection to Jack Ruby, more than to Lee Harvey Oswald, simply because the picture that we developed of Oswald and the picture that we think is accurate has Oswald following his own agenda. He's doing things that he wanted to do from his teenage years on. It's all very consistent. It's all, there are no changes. There are no anomalies. He follows his own path with his own belief system, his own goals all the way through. Nothing shows up, out of nowhere. Which the thing is that made him especially subject to being manipulated, because as with any con game, if you can get them marked, if you can convince them they're doing what you want to do and you're on their side, you're ahead, which is what we think happened to Oswald. But Jack Ruby, which a lot of people don't realize, actually was interviewed by a fellow Jolly West, who is a doctor who is really in charge of the entire MK Ultra program in all its phases, the LSD, mind alteration, and the sort of thing. And it's a lengthy story, but how he comes into the Jack Ruby picture, how he gets to meet with Jack Ruby in private, in custody, and how Jack Ruby's whole behavior. At one point, Jack Ruby says he's willing to tell Earl Warren the real story. He's not safe. He needs to go to Washington. He'll spill everything he knows about the real conspiracy. And then suddenly, after these visits from Jolly West, he goes totally off the rails and becomes almost irrational.
Larry, thank you. We're going to have to end it there. I appreciate it. A few people have been calling. I didn't even give the phone number, but a few people have been calling with questions for you. So you're going to have to come back again another day, and we'll delve into this, especially as more of these documents end up coming to light.
Thank you, sir.
Larry Hancock. The book is The Oswald Puzzle. Those of you that are holding, if you want to make a comment, I'll try and take you after this break. And if you want to comment on any portion of the discussion, you can certainly give me a call, 646-720-0635. That's 646-720-0635, straight ahead.